Welcome to the Environmental Health Programming that Inspires and Excites webinar, co-sponsored by the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health and the National Environmental Health Association. My name is Liz Weiss. I'm with the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, and I will provide some introductory remarks, and I will go over the agenda right now. First of all, we'll cover the learning objectives and introduce our speakers for today. Our moderator will come on to frame the session in just a few moments. Then we have our first speaker from CEPH to give us their perspective. We have two exemplars from ASPPH members providing their curricular offerings to students in environmental health. And then we will move on to around 10 minutes of a roundtable speaker chat moderated by our moderator, and then an open discussion with the audience for about 15 minutes at the end. We invite you at any time, starting now, to submit questions or comments in the question box that you'll see there in the portal on your screen. So go ahead, we'll be tracking those all along. No need to wait until the end. We'll gather them up as we go. We look forward to your engagement with us today. I'll go over our learning objectives, and they are two: to describe a One Health approach to teaching environmental health, and to describe a climate-oriented approach to teaching environmental health. All right, featuring some terrific leaders in the field for us. First, our moderator, Dr. David Dijak, DRPH, CIH, Executive Director of the National Environmental Health Association. Next, our first presenter, Ms. Molly Mulvanity, MPH, CAE, Deputy Director of the Council on Education for Public Health. And then our second speaker, Dr. Maurice Bunning, PhD, Professor and Extension Specialist in Food Safety, Food Science, and Human Nutrition at the Colorado State University, Colorado School of Public Health. And our final speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Shaman, PhD, Professor, Department of Environmental Health Sciences, Director, Climate and Health Program at the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. And with that, I turn over the podium to our moderator, Dr. David Dijak.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome to everyone from Denver, Colorado. You know, it seemed almost like yesterday I received a phone call from Tom Burke, who had recently left the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and returned to his faculty position at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, the Bloomberg School. And Tom had asked me in the winter term of 2017 to participate in a town hall meeting there in Baltimore. And let me tell you, Liz, the mood was grim, and probably for good reason. A new administration had just been elected on an anti-regulatory platform, and this was coupled with an impression, and let me just say, it's an impression among some, that the Council on Education for Public Health had abandoned the environmental health profession through its 2016 accreditation revisions. Those two things left everyone feeling pessimistic about the future. And I remember driving home from Baltimore that day feeling very, very sober. While that session was sobering, it ushered in a new era, at least in my perception, of the environmental health profession. I found myself reflecting on my time in Madagascar many years ago when I was an assistant professor, where we, working with local communities there in Madagascar, identified what were referred to as positive deviants. These were impoverished mothers whose children thrived in communities where other children did not do so well. So we asked ourselves, what were these mothers doing that perhaps other mothers in the community could learn from, so that every child could reach their full potential? Today's program is really about positive deviance. and the early adopters of new and innovative academic programs. And this is not a trivial conversation. I'd like to remind everyone that's listening in, as we think about public health and how it's delivered, and I'm focused on North America, the second largest part of the public health workforce behind public health nurses is the environmental health profession. So any implications of changing or innovative academic programming and the product coming from the schools and programs in public health is going to be feeding directly into the second largest part of public health as we know it in the United States. My point is, this is not a trivial dialogue today, and I hope that we can reflect on the speaker's comments and learn from them, and then to challenge one another as we move forward in time and space. But speaking of a lack of trivia, the changes to the CEPH requirements for schools of public health and programs in 2016 really sent a ripple across the environmental health profession. And I'd now like to turn it over to Molly. Molly, what happened then, and what's happening now, and what insight can you give us on the changing conditions within environmental health and accredited schools and programs of public health?
Thanks so much, Dave. Next slide, please. Since the 2016 criteria were adopted, CEPH has seen changes in units degree offerings. Old offerings discontinued and new offerings added. This was anticipated since the criteria aim to place fewer constraints on the degrees that schools offer and open opportunities for schools to focus in areas of strength or community need. Despite some perceptions that revised accreditation criteria might result in diminishment of environmental health instruction, our data do not support that assertion. 4 of 67 schools of public health no longer offer degrees in environmental health sciences. Next slide, please. We've also seen a great number of degree programs added in environmental health. So all of the listings that you see on the slide in front of you are degrees that have been added since the revision and adoption of new accreditation criteria. We have also seen consolidations of multiple small environmental health concentrations into a single degree offering with no actual loss of coursework. But as you can see, the degree offerings in environmental health have actually seen a net increase rather than a decrease in terms of actual curricula offered since the adoption of the revised accreditation criteria. Next slide, please. That speaks to degree offerings, but what about environmental health content in all public health degree offerings? Well, when we adopted the 2016 criteria, we adopted revised foundational competencies for the MPH and the DRPH. And what we've found is that our MPH foundational competencies align with many aspects of the National Environmental Health Association's description of an environmental health professional. Let's walk through. This is taken directly from the NEHA website. The first 3 are on the screen. As you can see, the top 2 elements in NEHA's definition of environmental health professional or specialist are specific to those who focus their degree areas in an environmental health discipline. If we could go to the third, develop, promote, and enforce guidelines, policies, laws, and regulations. This particular definition element is encompassed in several of the MPH and DRPH foundational competencies. Next, please. Develop and provide health communications and educational materials. Again, this is encompassed within several MPH and DRPH foundational competencies. Next, please. Manage and lead environmental health units within organizations, also encompassed in our foundational competencies. Proceed, please. Next. Perform systems analysis. Next. Engage community members to understand, address, and resolve problems. And finally, review construction and land use plans and make recommendations, and interpret research utilizing science and evidence, as well as interpret data and prepare technical summaries and reports. So only 3 of the elements in NEHA's own definition of an environmental health professional or specialist are not encompassed in the MPH and DRPH foundational competencies. And those 3 would be entirely appropriate to include in the concentration competencies that are required of all MPH and DRPH students. Next slide, please. One of the 3 major goals of our criteria revision was to provide greater flexibility to units, including enhancing their opportunities to offer degree programs that match students' interests and workforce needs. This seems to be happening. In the next year, we'll have some better idea of how the landscape of degree offerings has changed, but we're monitoring this constantly and have not seen any major outliers. To the extent that degree offerings have now been discontinued, our data have indicated that these discontinued degree offerings have almost universally been low or no enrollment degree offerings. The low or zero enrollment suggests that the degree programs, as constituted, may not have been meeting student interests and/or workforce needs. Next slide, please. We're excited about the curricular innovation we're seeing. Some places have implemented integrated core curricula, but even units that have retained distinct disciplinary courses for MPH students have introduced greater degrees of interdisciplinarity and authentic assessment. We are seeing units using environmental health scenarios and/or cases to provide instruction and assessment for a number of our foundational competencies. As you noted, the NEHA definition of an environmental health specialist aligns well with the foundational competencies, so the only element that's required is to teach those foundational competencies through an environmental health lens. And many of our schools and programs have indeed chosen to do that, choosing examples and elements that are relevant to their communities and to students' interests and workforce needs. We have units assessing communication-related competencies using environmental risk communications principles. We have units assessing systems thinking using problems that include environmental and biological feedback loops. We have units assessing policy-related competencies using environmental regulations. We look forward to continuing to see how units adapt their curricula to prepare students for today's public health challenges. And with that, next slide, please. I'll turn over to our next presenter, Dr. Maurice Bunning.
Thanks, Molly. And good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you today. Although I was not involved when the animals, people, and the environment concentration was originally planned and developed about 12 years ago, I have served as a co-leader of the concentration, and along the way I became a passionate fan and advocate. So that's why I'm glad to have this chance to share information about some of the ways that students and the public have benefited from this program. Colorado State, oops, is the first slide up? I don't see the first slide. Ooh, technical difficulties. There it is. Yay. Thank you. Let's see. So Colorado State, you'll see the seal up on the right there, is one of 3 schools collaborating in the Colorado School of Public Health. And it is our state's only land grant institution. So outreach is a very important part of CSU's mission. Next slide, please. So the One Health concept, which recognizes that the health of people, animals, and the environment is very interconnected, has gained significant momentum, but it can be challenging to put into action, as in testing interventions or finding solutions, because it requires transdisciplinary collaboration and making some of those difficult connections across diverse fields of science and numerous state and federal agencies. One of the great features of the APE concentration is that it capitalizes on strengths that already existed here, both on and off campus. In the Rocky Mountain region, we have abundant wildlife, natural resources, Forest Service land, along with a strong livestock and dairy industry. So there are related agencies that are already in this region that tie our, our landscape, our environment with public health. So MPH students in this program take coursework in several different departments and units, from the School of Veterinary Medicine to the School of Natural Resources. And then to prepare students, they often have projects that are involved with many local agencies, including CDC's Vector-Borne Disease Division, USDA, both with the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service or the National Wildlife Research Center. Not on the slide, but also the Environmental Protection Agency, Colorado Department of Agriculture, as well as many county and state health departments. So these are the strengths that are present here, but APE students may have projects that extend to other regions and in areas that are not well represented here, marine life, for example. So in those cases, they would need to partner with experts from other institutions. This type of program has such great potential to work in many different areas because of the different specializations. Like all states, Colorado's environment really helps define the state, sets the stage, it drives the lifestyle here, so that the environment is just extremely important part of this concentration. Next slide, please. I included this slide just to highlight some of the diversity in the coursework. So this particular concentration is available for a Master's of Public Health students, which is normally a 2-year program, but it's also available for students in CSU's combined MPH DVM program, which is generally a 5-year program. There are, of course, some core course requirements to provide the fundamentals of public health, but then a wide range of electives are available for students to be able to customize their pathway. I teach a graduate level food protection class, and since food issues are often located in the APE triangle, I've had that opportunity to get to know so many APE students who have taken my class as part of their particular curriculum. Next slide, please. I also wanted to include some of the core competencies because, as you know, there is a set of core competencies associated with any degree in public health. And these are just a few of the ones from APE, but I wanted to highlight these in particular because environmental health is such an important part of this MPH education. The first bullet, please. So this addresses how much the focal points are interconnected and also the potential effects because it crosses, as it says, social, political, cultural differences. It really is a broad look across many different areas. Next bullet, please. And then the second bullet speaks to the impact of changing geographies, and that's such an important part of a public health education right now. And third bullet, please. So this third statement enforces the importance of communicating the One Health concept. Altogether, the competencies help to form that stable structure that guides both the instructors and the students. Next slide, please. My favorite slide, got lots of great photos that illustrate some of the examples of our students' projects. There have been some international projects, as you can see, as well as many statewide and local projects. Over the past several years, several students have focused on poultry flock projects because this is a One Health issue right now. And backyard or schoolyard poultry is a good example. That's the slide up on the right there. And I think it's a good example because where people and poultry share the same environment, we've learned that this can lead to public health issues. And CDC has recently been sharing information about the ongoing problem of human salmonella infections linked to backyard poultry. This particular project originated as a result of a request from a county 4-H agent who wanted to help their local school because of an interest in poultry. And then we had some follow-on projects that were related to this And one student conducted a survey of flock owners to determine what their poultry and egg handling practices were and provided some guidance on that. And then another focused on producing information sheets about safe handling, which was targeted to parents of young children. So since CSU guides a statewide extension network, many of the materials and the information that have been developed from various students is shared broadly across the state via extension. Next slide, please. And finally, I wanted to wrap up with some examples of what the students from the APE concentration are doing with their degrees. And I would say altogether what they're doing is they're using their education and their experience to operationalize One Health. And this can be pretty difficult to do, but with their background and their education combined, I think that's really helping give them the skills to be able to do this. And I run into many of the former students at state meetings, and I'm always so impressed with the work that they're doing. They are a powerful force for public health change. Thank you, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jeffrey Shaman.
Thank you, Maurice. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the director of the Climate and Health program at the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The Climate and Health program was founded in 2008 here at Mailman with a mission to foster training and innovative scholarship on the human health dimensions of climate change impacts and vulnerabilities, and to provide information of direct value for adaptation and mitigation planning. The strategies that we have and we try to impart to our students are to impact climate change and its association and effects on human health through policies that are going to mediate adaptation, resilience, mitigation, and co-benefits within the larger population. We have a core faculty, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, that's comprised of some of the world's top researchers in the field, and we have a number of collaborators actually throughout all of Columbia University. At this point, we offer a master's certificate in climate and health. It's the first of its like in the nation. And we also graduate and have a thriving doctoral program. We graduated our first climate and health doctoral student in 2014, and she's now gone on to be an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. We also have and are able to support our doctoral students and postdocs through an NIH training grant that we acquired from the National Institutes for Environmental Health Sciences, which has been very beneficial for expanding and perpetuating the program. Within the Mailman School, the Climate and Health program is one of 18 certificates. The program itself is embedded within our Environmental Health Sciences department, which is one of 6 departments within the Mailman School. We have what I would call 5 core faculty who are essentially fully embedded within the program, though that's really, we're all in environmental health sciences. And there are about another dozen within the school, largely, that includes both in environmental health sciences and in other departments who are affiliated and participate actively in supporting the educational and research mission of the program. We also have adjuncts as well as I mentioned before, faculty from other schools within the university who provide instruction, mentorship, course opportunities, etc. Within the Mailman program, we have 4 semesters. It's a 2-year MPH program, and in the first semester, all the students taking a core curriculum that was developed and launched about 7 years ago at Columbia. And that core curriculum introduces them to the breadth of public health research. It's not till their second semester that they're really getting an introduction into environmental health sciences, and they take their first concentration course in climate and health. And so it's really in the latter year that they're taking most of their course work. The curricula that we offer includes a climate and health survey course, a climate atmospheric science course, where the idea is really to teach them about atmospheric physics and climate physics so that they can be knowledgeable about what's going on and speak intelligently about the issue from both the health perspective as well as the climate side. An environmental health policy course, a sustainable development course, quantitative course in mixed methods for environmental epidemiology, which uses air pollution as its principal focus. a WASH course, an environmental justice course that's actually taught out of our population and family health department instead, but has a good component of it that focuses on climate and health justice issues, 2 semesters of GIS, and a capstone. You know, our learning objectives are numerous, and across the whole span of the certificate, the aim is really that we want our students to be able to analyze and understand the physical and chemical activities of the climate system, to understand how these impact and relate to health outcomes, and to be able to fully analyze and project the interdependence of climate and health, and really how climate change, both variability and global warming, are feeding into both direct, indirect, as well as complex downstream impacts. We want this to inform their critical thinking, and we want to develop their quantitative skills and their abilities to act as policy advocates. I'll give you a couple specific learning objectives from some of the courses. One is to analyze the climate as a system of interconnected reservoirs, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, cryosphere, geosphere, in which mass and energy flow from one part to another through dynamic processes that operate on a range of scales. Another one would be from another course to project the health impacts of climate change into the future. Another would be to draw from the tools of climate science, epidemiology, and health impact assessment in analyzing health risks from climate change. And another would be to acquire the ability to read, understand articles from relevant disciplines, including public health, water and sanitation, engineering, and sustainable development. Within the master's program, which is obviously what I'm focusing on here, there are a couple thesis options. Students can opt into a thesis, it's not required, and it can be either a large review of a topic that's worked out with their thesis advisors, or a research that is original research. Very often in the case of the research, this may be the extension of work that they've engaged in their practicum, which takes place between the 2nd and 3rd semesters, the 1st and 2nd years over the summer. I'll also say that all the students have to take a capstone course in which they interact with a client that can be from university, business, public health entities that are asking them to do some sort of structural exercise for them as a client. And this client-facing work very often involves some form of research, and we've had this for our climate and health students as well, working on this. In terms of how the program interfaces with the rest of the environmental health science department, not every student in environmental health science takes the climate and health certificate, and not all the climate and health certificate students are from environmental health science. So in that of itself, there is a lot of interaction both with the department and the school broadly. In addition, this is reinforced through that 1st semester core where everyone has to take a common curriculum. It also is through the EHS requirements, our environmental health science requirements, and additional quantitative science classes and environmental determinants of health classes, and certainly through the practicum and student groups as well. Lastly, I wanted to just touch on what some of the career options are for graduates of our program. And this is something that is something that we think a lot about, because climate and health is a bit of a political issue the minute you put the word climate in it. And it's a very large scale issue for which the local problems are not always immediately evident, and the job base for it is not always so clear. However, what we have found is our graduates have been going into a diversity of job placements. These include NGOs, government positions, consulting, pharma, and PhD programs. Very often we find that places that are hiring people with an intent on One Health, planetary health, and global health are very amenable to hiring climate and health students in particular. I think the larger issue, of course, is that the issues associated with planetary health, One Health, global health, and climate and health are not going to go away anytime soon. These are issues where we're going to have to deal with the impacts on human health, and going forward, we do think we're going to see an expansion of job opportunities there. To that end, we're actually conducting our own survey of potential hirers to find out who's actually interested in it, who's not interested in it, who's thinking about this as a job workforce addition for their own program or NGO or government positions. Thank you very much. I will pass it back to the moderator.
Dave, it's back to you for the roundtable chat. While Dave's coming back, I'd like to thank our three presenters. And we have been receiving a few questions into the question box, so that's great. We'll take those at the end. And as we wait for Dr. Dijak, go ahead. And
I think I'm back in.
You are.
Yes. So Dr. Shaman, I got hives while you were speaking when you mentioned 18 certificates. The scheduling on that must be quite a challenge, but that's not my question. You mentioned the job base is not clear at the moment, but there seem to be opportunities for graduates as they move through your program. Do you have any advice or orientation for students who may be listening in today about what to anticipate if they were to go to Columbia? Would this be incumbent on them to find employment? Is the environment for career opportunities, do you see it beginning to explode, or is it more incremental? Any thoughts on how to prepare the next generation?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And I'll add that I'm thankfully not in charge of the scheduling of certificates. It's an issue that I think is going to incrementally advance. It is something where we do keep tabs on what happens to our graduates. The school in particular takes great pride in knowing that 98% of its graduates are placed within a job within a certain amount of time. I think it's within 6 months or even less. And it's very important to us that if you're going to invest your time in the program, your time and your money, that you reap something out of this. I think the issue with this particular program is that we've been at the very vanguard of this, and when you're taking the road less traveled, there's going to be some bumps in this. It's still relatively novel, and what we're finding is that we are getting job placement for all our graduates. It sometimes takes a little bit of time. When I say that, I mean many months, not years. And it sometimes isn't exactly the precise fit that every student wants, which sounds a little discouraging. But when there aren't job descriptions that are specifically for a climate and health specialist, but are rather for somebody who can work on planetary health or One Health or global health, we feel our graduates are incredibly competitive because they do have a grounding in environmental health sciences or another discipline, be it if they were in a different department like Pop Fam or epidemiology, but they took our certificate, that they're grounded enough across disciplines that they're very competitive. Furthermore, they're providing a set of attributes and critical thinking skills that are fairly unique, that we're finding that the employers are very much in favor of, and that they've done very, very well. I do think that the larger community, the world at large, in terms of dealing with climate change itself, let alone climate change in health, is in a bit of a catch-up mode right now. And so figuring out where that space aligns is going to be a continually evolving field, and something that both we as a school and our graduates are going to have to continually to adjust to.
Yeah, thanks. What I heard you say is students should be realistic and be flexible as they graduate from the program. And this is something I've observed over the years, is that sometimes our students will focus on a specific objective. And while I admire that from a career perspective, there are many, many different portals into the environmental health profession. And I really appreciate your guidance around being flexible, at least for that first position. Gain access, be really impressive with your work. And then I find that people find work that is rewarding to them over time, but that flexibility is absolutely critical.
I completely agree. I think that was very, very well stated.
Thanks. I'd like to ask Dr. Bunning, I mean, are you finding that the same kind of flexibility is required? I was impressed by the list of locations where your graduates currently are with a One Health orientation, including working in wildlife, CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Health and the Environment, with the CDC Vector-Borne Diseases branch. Are you seeing positions posted One Health expert or someone with an MPH in One Health, or are folks going into career positions that are aligned but not exactly doing One Health, getting right out of the gate? And if you have any thoughts on that or any recommendations for people that have a burning kind of interest in One Health.
Well, I'm not sure what the position announcements would look like. I doubt that they necessarily state that strength in One Health area is needed. But I think what the students who apply for these positions, what they are able to bring to the application process and then the position is that interdisciplinary strength, because thinking across disciplines takes practice. Scientists often like to focus in on one particular area to drill down to the deepest level, but sometimes answers come by connecting dots across a landscape of multiple fields, and just the experience of having done that, I think may help them even in their job searches. They may be looking in a wider range of jobs, possibly. That's just a guess. But as far as graduates in general, I think that flexibility is definitely a valuable asset.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Working across disciplines is as important or more important than being able to work within your discipline. I like to say the action is in the space between the professions. And
Right.
I think recent history would suggest that that continues to be true, whether it's in climate change or in One Health. I'm struck by the number of environmental health professionals at the local level that are actually finding themselves working in climate change, but that C word is nowhere even remotely aligned with their position description. They're working on flooding, they're working on droughts, they're working on localized air pollution, they're working on saltwater intrusion into coastal drinking water resources. So it's a really complex environment, but one in which, if we are inclusive with the way that we think about our careers as we graduate, there's just, I think, tremendous and abundant career opportunities in environmental health. And I think that was one of the messages I tried to convey at Johns Hopkins when I was there, is no one is happy about the deconstruction of the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act as we looked into the future back then in 2017. But there is just abundant opportunities to express yourself professionally if you're flexible under the environmental health umbrella. And I mean that today as much as I meant it back in 2017. One of the most common questions I get for the academics that may be listening in is, where can we get a graduate to work in our local health department? We can't even find these people. Please help us in getting skilled, educated people at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. So if individuals are flexible geographically as well as intellectually after they graduate, I think the key message here is that there is plenty of opportunities all across the country, in the US territories, and increasingly abroad. But speaking of opportunities and aligning academic constructs with the need of our communities. Molly, you mentioned that the CEPH accreditation criteria that was realigned in 2016 was intended to give academic institutions flexibility to meet the needs of their constituents. Are you seeing any data to suggest that those changes are actually generating the outcomes that were desired back in 2016 when that realignment occurred?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the shifts that we've made as an agency is certainly trying to be more cognizant and intentional about tracking sort of data relating to our intended outcomes and perhaps unintended outcomes as well. I think it's a little bit early for us to see indications, I think, of the type that you were referring to. I think employment outcomes are a lagging indicator, and they're dependent on any number of things, of which education and the accreditation structure are sort of only a small part. However, we are seeing encouraging developments. I mentioned that we're seeing a degree of flux in the degree offerings right now, and that was indeed intentional. And I sort of mentioned that some of the degrees that have closed, not just in environmental health, but in other fields as well, have been low or zero enrollment. And I think some of our thinking at the council level was a bit of feeling, I don't want to say guilty, but for years we had sort of forced schools of public health to maintain degree offerings in areas that were perhaps not appropriate or not fitting student demand, or one might say workforce needs. Those two things could both be at play, or one could be more at play than the other. So we were hoping to sort of let go of that past and really unleash the sort of freedom and creativity. We also have a greater emphasis in our revised accreditation criteria on communications and, in fact, data collection from community stakeholders and the employment sector. So our hope is that this will continue to evolve. So the short answer is I don't think that we have the kind of clear data that we hope to have in 5 to 10 years, but in terms of degrees coming in and going out, that is entirely encouraging and sort of telling us that folks are feeling a bit more free to innovate and to evolve and to respond to community needs and student interests. I also think some of the degree programs that have stepped away are from what I know, talking to faculty and administrators at those universities, they're being retooled and they may come back looking different. Our revision of the accreditation criteria was, we think fairly, it was large and historic and sort of perhaps long overdue in some ways. So I think that there's a certain amount of shakeout that takes some time to occur after a change of this magnitude. And we look forward to sort of sharing back data with the broader public health community as we sort of see how things evolve and shake out now that we've had a couple of years of criteria implementation.
Thanks. Well, that's a conversation I'd like to be a fly on the wall for. Just what were the outcomes? What different types of arrangements were put in place, and are these changes meeting the needs of employers and people that are moving into the workforce? So I hope you'll invite me into that conversation when that data is collected. Thanks. We have about 15 minutes left for our session today, and I wanted to turn it back over to ASPPH. Do we have any questions that have come in from the audience?
We sure do, Dave. And as a reminder to all listeners, you could submit questions, comments right there in the box, something to say. We're very eager to hear it. We have a handful of questions, and so far the first three are open to anyone. And so Dave, I'll toss it back to you. The first one is, does anyone else notice and get upset that EH is never part of the healthcare debate? It needs to be known on the same level as nursing, but most people outside of EH do not know what it is.
So I'd be willing to take a stab at that because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. There were a few years ago conversations about primary care public health integration. And I tried to make a very strong case that with the IRS 990 requirements, the community benefit arm of hospitals, if you will, should systematically be thinking about environmental health. And particularly when most environmental health programs at the local level, and I'm speaking about governmental environmental health, have some of the most sophisticated data collection, aggregation, and reporting systems because they're working with with businesses that are regulated. They're inspecting daycares and schools and involved in a variety of other regulatory functions that require them to collect this data. This data, of course, might be useful to clinicians. And as we look at emerging issues such as Legionella in the country, environmental health professionals are uniquely suited to be part of the conversation as we identify risks and try to manage those going into the future. I flew in from Washington, D.C. yesterday, where a hospital has turned off its water because of a Legionella outbreak. And this is a case in point of environmental health being directly impactful on healthcare. In most cases, you don't have a direct link like that, but this is a case and in point. So we in environmental health need to do a better job of inserting ourselves in the conversation, wherever those conversations exist. And yes, I recognize everyone's stretched like saran wrap, but don't expect someone's going to invite you to a conversation about primary care, environmental health integration. Please self-invite, be positive, and offer solutions. And I believe we're going to be in a better place in the near future. I'd like to turn it over to Molly, Marisa, or Jeff to see if they have other comments.
Hi, this is Jeff. I very much agree with what David spoke of just now. I think we are often dealing with an issue where environmental health is left out of the conversation through fault of our own and through a lack of understanding of the insidious creep of what the levels of prevention it represents are. We live in a world with waste is completely unaccounted for very often. We have hundreds of thousands of unregulated chemicals in the environment. We have metals, we have water, air, and soil issues, and we have regulation that needs to be considered and advocated for. So we have a lot of work to do, and I couldn't agree more that it needs to be given greater prominence in the health discussion broadly.
Liz, we'll turn it back over to you for the second question.
Yes, a couple questions came in focused on the academic exemplars on the call. And the first one is, these two programs from Colorado and Columbia sound very exciting and heavily emphasize environmental health. We were wondering, however, if given the new accreditation competencies, there are programs in schools where a student can graduate with an MPH without ever having taken one class in environmental health, or at least a class that has environmental health related objectives. Could that happen?
So I guess, yeah, I think I'll take the first stab at that one. So the person asked sort of two different questions at the end, and so I would answer them differently. Could someone graduate from a public health program without ever taking a class in environmental health? Yes. That's because our accreditation criteria do no longer focus on classes and instead focus on competencies. And as I mentioned, as I alluded in my slide about the alignment between competencies and the skills needed in environmental health, our competencies were designed to be what I call discipline agnostic. That is, they can be taught through the lens of a variety of different disciplines. And we really rely on our academic community, who are the experts, to know in their fields, based on their expertise and based on their knowledge of student and workforce needs, that they will sort of vary and tailor and adjust those disciplinary lenses over time. So that's the first question. Is it possible that someone could have taken could graduate from a public health program without ever taking a class with environmental health related objectives? No. And that's because we address the topic areas. As I said, our competencies are discipline agnostic, but the content is addressed through our foundational learning objectives, and one of them explicitly and three more of them implicitly, fairly closely, require teaching some content in environmental health. So the answers are no, or I'm sorry, are yes and no to that question, that series of questions.
Thank you, Molly. Dave?
No, go for it, Liz. Do we have a third question?
Yes, we do. A few more. So this is for Dr. Shaman. Where do your students with the master's certificate in climate and health usually land? Health department, academia, private industry? And then a second question, are those pursuing the certificate mostly current students or professionals already in the workforce?
Those are good questions. There's no breakdown that it seems that they're choosing one over another between industry, public health practice, and doctoral programs. We see them going about in equal numbers to each of those disciplines or sectors upon graduation. I blanked on the second question. Could you repeat it again, Liz?
Sure. Let me just go down to it 1 second. Are those pursuing the certificate mostly current students or professionals already in the workforce?
Sorry about that. Yes, most of them are current students. We do have some professionals who are in the workforce coming back, but most of them are continuing their studies and are out of college. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Here's a general question. On some campuses, 2 or more colleges offer environmental health degrees. Are there disadvantages, advantages to an environmental health degree in a school or program of public health versus, for example, an environmental health degree in the engineering college?
I could take a stab at that. It is my impression that the greater familiarity there is on university campuses with environmental health writ large, the better informed the emerging workforce will be. Depending on an individual's student's inclinations with their career, they have the option under the environment that was posed to pick and choose a more engineering type of orientation, or perhaps one that's focused more on the biological and mathematical sciences. So in my estimation, a student with those choices should consider themselves blessed that they have those choices. They could probably get their cognates or their electives from other schools to assemble a program that meets their individual needs. So I think that's an individual question that's best answered by the student who has the privilege of toggling through that decision.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dave. Here's one that just came in. Is climate change part of the CEPH competencies?
So climate change is not explicitly part of the CEPH competencies. As I mentioned, the competencies are written to be skill-based rather than content-based. And so that was sort of a deliberate intention. We want to try and keep these competencies as stable as possible for as long as possible. And although, sadly, I guess I would say climate change will be on our agenda for quite some time, there was no way we were going to be able to get every content area phrased just the right way into our competencies, and that was not the intent. However, again, many of the curricula that I'm familiar with, because the intention was to allow for flexibility and allow schools and programs to teach the areas that are important and emerging, we certainly have many examples of places that are dealing with climate change very explicitly in their curricula.
Mm-hmm.
If I could jump in, outside the context of CEPH accreditation, at my program, we actually started a global consortium for climate and health education. And this is a completely free, open endeavor where in which we've been developing a network, a consortium as it is, of schools around the world. And these are health profession schools, so nursing, medicine, and public health, that sign up to try to begin to integrate climate and health education into their curricula. It's one of the aims of it, and we provide resources online, including links and a whole virtual town square for job opportunities, content, etc., within the climate and health sphere. And we have both an advisory council and a coordinating committee, and they've been working on finding ways of establishing what we would view as core competencies. This is, again, work that's done for free across all the members of it, and we're up to close to 200 members in this consortium, to try to figure out how we can actually get climate and health education integrated into medical, nursing, and public health curriculum universally.
Thank you, Molly and Jeff. And that really concludes our question period here. There's one more. We'll make sure that questioner gets an answer. And back to our moderator. For your closing summary.
Thank you. For those that know me, they know I'm passionate about environmental health. And as I close, we need to embrace the notion that environmental health is profoundly important to the health, safety, and security of everyone. As I look into the future, and I honestly mean this, I see a renaissance for the profession in our immediate future, and perhaps we've already entered that era. For students on the phone right now, take some notes. If you think that you have a good handle on environmental health, I want you to think about the next time you pick up a cell phone and recognize that there are 800,000 new 5G antennas that are planned to be constructed and put in place all across this country in the near future. For anyone on the phone that drinks water, I want you to think about the family of PFAS and its implications for all of us as we prepare our meals and drink our drinks. For those of you that have children or that may use athletic fields, I want you to think about the tire crumbs, the used tire pieces that make up those playgrounds, and the emerging science related to the exposures associated with that. If any of you eat fish, I want you to think about fish flesh being festooned with microplastics. Anybody this year who went to the beach knows that both freshwater and saltwater are being affected by harmful algal blooms. And anyone who happens to be inside that is breathing is potentially exposed to Legionella. Finally, if you're in the uniformed services, you know that your public health professionals are thinking seriously about the changing ecology and the distribution of vectors and what that means to our men and women in uniform. These and other challenges are going to test our discipline. They are going to test our professionalism. Frankly, they will test our character. Schools of public health have proven themselves to be hotbeds of innovation. NEHA, for its part, is looking forward to partnering with ASPPH, its schools, its programs, its universities, wherever they exist, to ensure that everybody can live a long and healthy life free from recognized harm. This is our moment. For anybody involved in environmental health, let's seize it. Liz, I'll turn it back over to you.
Super, Dave. Thank you. And we are very grateful to the partnership and look forward to continued collaboration with you at NEHA, all of our members and partner organizations. So I would like to just wrap her up today with inviting you all to attend the upcoming ASPPH webinars, Managing Compliance Challenges Involving Global Collaborators on Friday, October 11th, and then 400 Years of Inequality a public health perspective to eliminate racial disparities on October 16th, all free and open to the public. You could register on the ASPPH website right there at the bottom. These slides will be available right after within 24 hours for archiving, for checking back. Our upcoming attractions, the ASPPH annual meeting, March 18th through 20th, 2020, here outside of Washington, D.C. And prior to that, the Undergraduate Summit on March 20th. I want to show our deep appreciation for the time and dedication, the expertise provided by all four of today's speakers, Dr. Dijak, Ms. Mulvanity, Dr. Bunning, and Dr. Shaman. You've all been terrific. And to the attendees, thank you. You can see here the link for the webinar. And also please remember that we do provide 1 hour of certified in public health continuing education credits for these webinars. You will receive very shortly after the webinar is completed a short evaluation, just a handful of questions. If you have 3-4 minutes to respond to them, we'd be most grateful. With that, the webinar is concluded. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.